They fired me on a Friday at 4:57 p.m., 3 minutes before end of shift, and before I'd finished reading the email, my access was already gone. My name is Walt Donahue. I'm 53 years old, and for 19 years, I was the guy who kept Midwest Freight Solutions running. Not the guy whose name went on the press releases, not the guy with the corner office or the reserved parking spot. I was the guy in the server room at 2 a.m. when the routing software crashed and 200 trucks went dark across 3 states. The guy who figured out how to make a 2003-era dispatch system talk to modern GPS hardware using a workaround I built myself over a long weekend with a thermos of coffee and a pile of legacy documentation nobody else had bothered to read. No manual for that. No certification course that covered it. Just years of knowing exactly how the wires connected and what happened when they didn't. When I started at Midwest Freight in 2005, the entire IT infrastructure was 2 servers, a shared drive, and a prayer. The tracking system was a whiteboard in the dispatch office. If you wanted to know where a truck was, you called the driver. That was the system. I rebuilt it from the ground up, not all at once, piece by piece, budget cycle by budget cycle, fighting for every dollar. First came the server consolidation, then the routing software, then the real-time tracking integration that took me 14 months to get right because the hardware vendor's API documentation was written by someone who apparently hated clarity. I'd go home, eat dinner, put the kids to bed, then sit in the basement until midnight reading through error logs and testing configurations until something clicked. And it did click. Eventually, it always did. By 2015, our system uptime was at 99.4%. Clients noticed, contracts grew, the company went from 80 trucks to 200. Nobody connected those 2 things in any quarterly report, but I knew. And Pete Dunbar knew he was my supervisor before he retired. A straight-talking guy from Youngstown who used to say, "Walt, half this company doesn't know you exist, and the other half can't explain what you do, and that means you're doing it exactly right." Pete retired in 2019, went to Florida, sends me a fishing photo every few months. After Pete left, I reported to a rotating cast of operations directors who understood logistics but not infrastructure, which was fine. I didn't need them to understand it. I just needed them to stay out of the way while I kept the lights on, which they mostly did. Then Reed Sloan showed up. He came in February, 4 months before they fired me. VP of Technology, hired from a San Francisco startup that had burned through $30 million in venture capital before pivoting into something nobody could quite explain. He was 38, dressed like he was always 20 minutes from a TED Talk, and carried himself with the specific confidence of someone who had never been in a server room during an actual emergency. His first week, he asked me to walk him through the infrastructure. I spent 2 hours with him. Showed him the architecture, explained the redundancies, walked him through the custom integrations. He nodded along and took notes on his phone. His second week, he stood up in a company-wide meeting and called our infrastructure outdated spaghetti code. Said we needed to transform the stack, sunset legacy dependencies, and right-size the technology organization. 30 people in that room. I was in the back row with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching him use a laser pointer on a PowerPoint slide that had a picture of a tangled ball of string labeled current state. That ball of string had 99.4% uptime for 9 years, but okay. 3 weeks after that, he announced the outsourcing plan. Offshore IT team, lower overhead, scalable. The whole internal IT function, 4 people including me, would be eliminated. Transition timeline, 90 days. Jerry Kowalski, our HR manager, came by my desk the next morning. Jerry had been doing HR for 11 years. He was good at it, which meant he was good at delivering bad news without flinching. But he still looked like he'd rather be doing literally anything else when he walked over and asked if I had a few minutes. I had a few minutes. He told me my role was being eliminated as part of the technology restructuring. My last day would be in 90 days. Or I could take the severance package and leave sooner. Standard stuff. He slid a folder across the desk. I looked at the numbers. I said I'd think about it. What I was actually thinking about was the acquisition. Midwest Freight had been in talks with a larger regional carrier for almost a year. The deal was worth $40 million. It was all anyone in management talked about. Bigger bonuses, broader network, expansion into markets we couldn't touch as a standalone company. The deal was supposed to close in 6 weeks. Final systems review was scheduled. Everything was on track. Everything except the part where they just told the guy who built the systems to pack up his desk. I didn't say any of that to Jerry. I just took the folder, shook his hand, and went back to work. Because there was still work to do, and I've never been the kind of guy who stops doing his job just because the situation got complicated. That came later. The 90 days never happened. 2 weeks after Jerry's visit, the email came. Friday, 40:57 p.m. Subject line: important update regarding your position at Midwest Freight Solutions. I was still at my desk, finishing up a configuration update on one of the routing servers. Normal end-of-day stuff. I opened the email, started reading. Standard corporate language, strategic realignment, technology modernization initiative, effective immediately. That last part took a second to register. Not 90 days. Not a transition period. Immediately. I got to the third paragraph and my outlook went gray. Then the VPN client on my desktop dropped. Then the badge app on my phone stopped loading. They had locked everything before I finished reading my own termination notice. Whoever had set up the off-boarding sequence had either miscalculated the timing or just didn't care. Either way, I was sitting at a desk in a building I'd worked in for 19 years, reading an email telling me I no longer worked there, and I couldn't even scroll to the bottom of the page because my session had already been killed. I closed the laptop, sat there for a moment. The server room down the hall was humming the same way it always hummed. Nothing had changed in the building. Everything had changed for me. I picked up my personal items. A photo of Carol and Evan from last Thanksgiving. My coffee mug, the one Evan had given me that said world's okayest IT guy, which I'd always found more accurate than most things people put on mugs. A small notebook I kept for jotting down configuration notes by hand when I didn't want to log into a system. That was it. 19 years, and it fit in a paper lunch bag. Kreelanders was at his workstation when I walked past. He was 26 sharp, one of those kids who actually wanted to understand how things worked rather than just learn enough to pass a certification exam. I'd spent the better part of 2 years teaching him everything I could. He looked up when he saw me with the bag. He didn't say anything at first. Then, "This is wrong, Walt." "Probably," I said. "Line 3 server has a memory allocation issue that's going to surface in the next 48 hours. Check the event logs tonight." He wrote it down. Good kid. I walked out the front door for what I assumed was the last time and went to my truck. I sat in the parking lot for a while, maybe 20 minutes. Engine off. The late afternoon sun was cutting through the windshield, and the Friday traffic on Route 51 was starting to build. Normal Friday. Everybody going somewhere. I wasn't going anywhere in particular. I wasn't angry. That surprised me a little. I'd expected anger. What I felt instead was something more like clarity, the specific kind of calm you get when a complicated situation suddenly becomes very simple. They had made a decision. The decision had consequences. The consequences were about to become apparent. Out of habit, I pulled out my phone and opened the remote monitoring client, the one I'd installed 6 years ago to handle after-hours emergencies, without having to drive in every time something beeped. It was on my personal phone, on my personal carrier plan. I'd submitted expense reports for the data usage every quarter, always got reimbursed. Never thought much about it beyond that. It was still active. I scrolled through the system tree slowly. Routing servers, backup communications, fleet telemetry, and then I stopped on one item near the bottom of the list. License Manager, Truck Track Pro. Truck Track Pro was the tracking software that showed the real-time position of every vehicle in the fleet. 200 trucks, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Clients built their logistics planning around it. The acquisition due diligence had specifically cited system uptime and tracking reliability as key value drivers. It was, in practical terms, the most critical piece of software the company ran, and the license was registered to my personal credit card. This wasn't negligence. 6 years ago, the company needed that software live within 11 days to fulfill a client contract. The CFO had put the purchase request in a review queue that had a 3-week turnaround. I'd bought the license myself on my Visa and expensed it afterward. Standard workaround for anyone who's ever worked in operational IT. You do what the job needs. The renewal had kept processing automatically every month against my card with confirmation emails going to my personal address. I'd flagged it for transfer twice. Put it in writing both times, once in 2020 and once in 2022. Both requests went into the same place most of my requests went. Acknowledged, not acted on, eventually forgotten. The current license cycle expired Monday, 6 a.m. I sat with that for a minute, maybe longer. I looked at the photo of Evan I keep in my wallet, not on my phone, actually in my wallet the old-fashioned way. It's from May 2021, his college graduation. University of Pittsburgh. Carol had taken about 300 photos that day because I wasn't there. I wasn't there because a server migration had gone sideways that Saturday morning, and I'd spent 11 hours on the phone with a vendor while my son walked across a stage and shook somebody's hand and became the first person in our family to get a 4-year degree. The company sent me a one-line email the following Monday. Thanks for your flexibility this weekend. I put the wallet back in my pocket. I opened the license manager. Canceled the auto renewal. 4 taps. The confirmation came back immediately. Renewal canceled. Current license valid through end of cycle. End of cycle. Monday, 6 a.m. I set the phone on the passenger seat and started the truck, pulled out of the parking lot and drove home. Steady hands, clear eyes. The traffic on Route 51 moved the same way it always moved on a Friday afternoon, and I merged into it like nothing particular had happened. But something particular had happened. They just didn't know it yet. Carol was in the kitchen when I got home. She looked at me just once the way she does, and said, "What happened?" I told her. All of it. The email, the badge, the parking lot. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about her. 28 years as a nurse will do that. You learn to let people finish before you respond. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They finally showed you what you were worth to them." That was it. She put a cup of coffee on the counter in front of me and went back to what she was doing. No drama. No questions about what we were going to do next or whether we'd be okay. Just that one sentence, delivered like a diagnosis. She wasn't wrong. I went down to the basement workshop. It's not much. A workbench, a decent chair, a filing cabinet I bought at a government surplus auction when we first moved in. I keep documentation down there. Not company property, just my own records. Every system I'd ever built or rebuilt at Midwest Freight, written up in plain language. Wiring notes, configuration files. Vendor contacts who wouldn't talk to anyone else because the only number they had on file was my cell. I'd started keeping those records 8 years ago because I'd watched too many companies lose everything when the experienced guy walked out the door and took all the knowledge with him. I didn't want to be part of that story. I opened the Truck Track Pro section and read through it. Renewal procedures. License transfer process, including the 2 written requests I'd submitted and the 2 non-responses I'd received. Everything documented, everything dated. I closed the folder, sat back in the chair, and let the weekend happen around me. Evan called Saturday afternoon. He'd heard from Carol. "Dad, you okay?" Same thing he always asks when something big happens. Better than okay, I told him. He didn't entirely believe me, but he let it go. Good kid. Knows when to push and when not to. Monday came the way Mondays do in Pittsburgh. Gray sky, cold air, traffic already backed up on 376 before 7 a.m. I was at the kitchen table with coffee when my phone started moving at 6:04. Corey Landers. I let it ring. 6:09. Corey again. Let it ring. 6:17. Number I didn't recognize turned out to be the dispatch supervisor, a guy named Earl who'd worked the overnight shift for 11 years and had never once called my personal cell before. Let it ring. I refilled my coffee and watched the backyard. The neighbor's dog was doing its usual circuit of the fence line. Same route every morning, reliable. By 7:30 I had 6 voicemails. I played them in order, standing at the kitchen counter. Corey. First call. Walt, the tracking system is completely down. Nobody knows where any of the trucks are. I don't know what happened. Voice tight, trying to stay professional. Corey, second call. The acquisition team is coming in at 8:30 for the final systems review. Reed is, he's not handling this well. Please call me back. Earl. Mr. Donahue. This is Earl Briggs from dispatch. I don't know if this is the right number, but we have 200 trucks running blind and I can't reach anybody in IT who knows what to do. Reed Sloan. Walt. This is Reed. We're experiencing a significant system outage, and I need you to call me back immediately. This is urgent. Calm on the surface, but I'd worked around enough pressure situations to hear what was underneath it. The man was not calm. The operations director, a guy named Scott I'd met maybe 4 times. Mr. Donahue, I'm going to need you to contact us as soon as possible regarding a critical system issue. We're prepared to discuss compensation for your time. And then Gary Whitfield from the acquiring company. Measured, professional, every word chosen carefully. Mr. Donahue, my name is Gary Whitfield. I'm the Director of Operations handling the Midwest Freight acquisition. I understand there may be some technical difficulties this morning. I'd appreciate a call at your earliest convenience to understand the situation before my team completes their review. I set the phone face down on the table. Carol came downstairs at 7:45, already dressed for her shift at Pittsburgh General. She glanced at the phone. How many? 6, I said. She nodded like that was exactly the right number, poured her coffee, kissed me on the cheek, and left for work. The call I was actually waiting for came at 11:20. Dean Farrell, the corporate attorney. I dealt with Dean exactly once before during a vendor contract dispute 3 years ago. He was good at his job, which meant he was good at saying things without technically saying them. Walt, thanks for taking my call. I hadn't taken it yet at that point, but I let it go. I wanted to reach out personally because I think there may have been some miscommunication around the circumstances of your departure from Midwest Freight. We'd like to explore whether there's a path forward that works for everyone involved. I let him talk for another 4 minutes. He covered mutual cooperation, professional relationships, shared interests in a positive resolution, and the company's deep respect for my years of service. He did not mention the tracking system. He did not mention the acquisition review. He did not mention the $6 million penalty clause that would trigger if system uptime fell below threshold during the review window. He didn't have to. We both knew why he was calling. When he finished, I said, "Here's how this works, Dean. Donahue Tech Solutions charges $200 an hour for standard consulting, $300 an hour for emergency response. Retainer is $5,000 paid in advance, minimum 8-hour billing increments." Silence. "And Dean, I don't work for Midwest Freight Solutions anymore. I work for whoever pays my consulting rates and treats my expertise with professional respect. My rates go up 10% every day you wait. I'll need to speak with management," he said. "Take your time," I said, and hung up. I went to the basement, opened my laptop, and started drafting the articles of incorporation for Donahue Tech Solutions. I'd been thinking about it for a while. Turns out all you need to get started is an afternoon and a reason. I had both. The retainer hit my account Tuesday morning, $5,000 wire transfer before 9 a.m. I didn't rush. I made breakfast, read the news, took a walk around the neighborhood. Carol had left for her shift already. The house was quiet, in the way it only gets on weekday mornings, not empty, just settled. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, with a second cup of coffee, and thought about what 19 years of showing up actually looked like when you added it all up. It looked like this. A company with 200 trucks driving blind and a $40 million acquisition hanging by a thread. Calling the guy they'd fired 3 business days ago and wiring him $5,000 before breakfast to please come back. I called Dean Farrell at 9:30 and told him I'd be there Wednesday morning, not Tuesday, Wednesday. He said that was fine in a tone that made it clear. It was very much not fine, but he had no leverage to say otherwise. That was accurate. I drove to Midwest Freight Solutions on Wednesday in my own truck, wearing a plain button-down and carrying a bag with my laptop and an invoice book. No company polo. No badge. I signed in at the front desk as a vendor, Walt Donahue, Donahue Tech Solutions, and waited in the lobby while someone came to escort me back. It was Corey who came to get me. He looked like he hadn't slept since Friday, which was probably close to accurate. He shook my hand and said, "Thank you for coming," and I could tell he meant it in the way people mean things when they've been scared for 3 days straight. Clock started when I pulled into the parking lot. I told him. He nodded and led me to the server room. The truck track issue took 31 minutes. I knew the configuration the way you know your own kitchen, where everything is, what order things need to happen in, which step everyone always skips, and why that matters. I reactivated the license under a new account in my company's name, properly this time, with full ownership documentation and a clean transfer record. Updated the renewal settings, tested the live feed on 12 vehicles across 3 routes, green across the board. Corey watched the whole thing without saying much. At one point he said, "That's it. That's all it was. That's all it was." I said, "We had 3 IT contractors in here yesterday trying to figure out what was wrong." I know I said, "I saw the access logs." He didn't have a response to that. I spent the rest of Wednesday and most of Thursday doing something nobody had ever asked me to do in 19 years but should have asked me to do in year 2. I documented everything, not just truck track, every system, every custom configuration I'd written and why I'd written it, every workaround and the problem it was solving, every vendor relationship, names, direct numbers, the specific way you had to phrase things to get a response from the hardware support line that officially had a 48-hour turnaround, but would answer in 20 minutes if you knew who to ask for. Every critical dependency that had been living in my head since the day I built it. I turned 19 years of institutional knowledge into a document that any competent IT professional could actually follow, step by step. No assumed knowledge, no gaps where experience was supposed to fill in. Then I submitted my invoice, 40 hours at blended rates, plus the retainer. I handed it to Jerry Kowalski on my way out Thursday afternoon. He looked at the total for a moment. Then he said, "You know, Walt, if things had gone differently, they didn't," I said. I shook his hand and walked out. The acquisition closed 2 weeks later. The Monday outage had triggered the penalty clause, $65,000 reduction in the final price. The integration timeline got pushed back 2 months. From what Corey told me later, the acquiring company's operations team had some pointed questions about IT governance during the final review that nobody on the Midwest Freight side had great answers for. Riad Sloan was placed on a performance improvement plan 3 weeks after the close. He didn't get fired outright, that's not usually how it works at that level, but in practical terms, his influence was gone. Everyone in the building knew it. Corey said Reed had stopped showing up to the morning operations meetings, sent a delegate instead. I wasn't tracking any of it in real time. I had other things to focus on. The first new client call came 8 days after the Midwest Freight job. A logistics company in Youngstown, smaller operation. 60 trucks, same era of infrastructure. The operations manager had heard about the situation through the freight industry grapevine, the way things always travel in a business where everyone knows everyone. He didn't ask for details. He just said, "I heard you're consulting now. We've got a guy who's been here 22 years and he's retiring in the spring. Can you help us figure out what we're going to lose when he walks out the door?" That's actually the job, not fixing what's already broken, getting there before it breaks. By the end of the first month, I had 3 paying clients. By the end of the second month, 5. Carol designed the logo for Donahue Tech Solutions on a Sunday afternoon. Nothing complicated, just clean. Evan called when he saw it on the website. "Looks good, Dad," he said. "Looks like you." I'm not sure exactly what he meant by that, but I'll take it. The basement workshop is busier now than it ever was. Not with midnight emergency calls from supervisors who needed something fixed before the morning shift. With actual work projects I chose, problems I found worth solving, clients who called back not because everything had collapsed, but because they wanted to get ahead of it before it did. Some mornings I still reach for my old work phone out of habit, the one that used to buzz at 2 a.m. when a server went down and somebody needed me there by 5. It's not on the nightstand anymore, and I don't miss it the way I thought I would. What I know now, and maybe should have known sooner, is that expertise doesn't expire, it just gets mispriced. For 19 years, I sold mine at salary rates because that's how the arrangement worked, and I didn't think too hard about what it was actually worth on the open market. It took a Friday afternoon email and a parking lot and 4 taps on a phone screen to show me the difference. They thought they were eliminating a legacy dependency. What they actually did was teach me my own market value, and that education cost them $65,000 and 2 months of schedule. Fair trade. The most dangerous person in any company isn't the one making noise in the conference room. It's the quiet one who knows exactly how everything connects and what happens when it doesn't. They forgot that. For about 72 hours, they remembered. And the next time they hire someone quiet, who knows everything and says nothing, maybe they'll remember that too, before the Friday email. Not after.